Welcome to Masters of Risk, the podcast where we uncover what is top of mind for business leaders today. I'm Yashi and I will be your host every month. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Masters of Risk, a podcast by S&P Global Market Intelligence. I am your host, Yashi Adab, and joining me today is the widely regarded Henrietta Fore. Henrietta, I'm so excited to have you on today. I'm so excited to hear about your experiences, your thoughts on the current state of the world and the markets, and I'd love to give you the opportunity now to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Yashi. It's a pleasure to be with you. I've lived in a world in which I've spent time in the private sector, in the public sector, and in the nonprofit sector. And it has been a wonderful mix and a synergy. So I've had the great pleasure of being in business, a family business in steel lath and manufacturing, and on lots of corporate boards, big multinationals. I've also served in government, in USAID, in Department of Treasury, in Department of State, and in UNICEF at the United Nations. And I've served in nonprofits, and each one of them teaches you something important and allows you to help the world, to make it a better place for all of us. So it's really been exciting. I grew up in California, and my father is American, and my mother was Swiss. So I always thought about Europe and America, the developing world. We thought about cultures and places and people that were different from ourselves.
That's such an interesting and just, I think, complex background. Would you mind going a little bit more into some of the stories and how your experiences differed when you worked in, say, the public versus the private sector?
Well, they are very different. And I think one of the lessons I did learn was that being in a small family business teaches you business from the ground up. It's a really good training ground for everything that comes later. Big businesses, big multinational businesses, businesses that are in the developing world. But it's also a really good, important lesson for government because the private sector works differently in that time and money are valued differently. So in private business, as you well know, Yashi, we're after speed to market. We want it to be self-supporting financially. In government, you want to get the policies right. You want to think about equity for all the people in the country. You actually take time. For us in USAID, often it would take 2 years to develop a program or a project. So money and time are viewed differently, but there is much to be learned from each one. And so people that have served in private companies, in government, and in nonprofits can be enormously helpful and powerful as sources of information. So for instance, private sector brings problem solving and that financial self-supporting independence. The public sector brings you the whole environment, the policy environment. The nonprofit sector makes you understand how to work with volunteers and what motivates someone within a company and why they help something. And they're ingenious about frugal innovations. So you learn something from each sector and they can help each other. So if you have a chance, you really want everyone to spend time in each of these sectors because you will benefit all of it. It's synergistic.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like that. Have you interacted with individuals such as yourself who have experience in all of these different sectors, or have you sat in a room and seen how the mindsets differ and how the problem solving approaches differ? And what have you learned or taken away from those experiences in terms of mitigating risks or, facing challenges or maybe, a moment of conflict where you have to take 10 or 15 minutes to kind of, gather your thoughts and come to a solution?
So Yashi, you are correct that when you are in a room or you're trying to solve some problem, if you have people from different sectors, they will view the premises of the problem differently. They'll view the tools differently. So those of us who understand financial tools are
Mhm.
quick to use finance, but those who do not and live in a world in which it's the people, it's the organization, they will come to a different conclusion. And it's essential that you use both. So, what I can say is that you want people with diversity, with variety of experiences around a table when you have a problem, and there are many problems like that that come up. September 11th was certainly one of those.
I know we've talked a little bit about this in the conversation that you and I had earlier, but what was I know you had a role to play during that period in our history. What was that? What was that role? What was it like? What were your experiences? I think I'd love to hear about those.
I was at the United States Mint at the time in the Department of Treasury, working for Paul O'Neill as Secretary of Treasury, who you know, legendary Alcoa CEO, businessman. And we actually had come across two issues. One was anthrax, and one was September 11th, and both of them were wake-up calls about what safety you need within our nation's currency. The currency of a nation is history in your pocket. It also is the full faith and credit of your country. So it's extremely important for both its reputation as well as its actual physical shape and use. But anthrax was a problem in that you could have something on a coin that could be passed from person to person and could sicken your population. September 11th was a difficulty because for us, if the mint was in danger, it meant that the standing of the United States uh, was severely at risk, because if your money is not moving in your country, if you come to a standstill, that is a real problem. Plus, the United States Mint also looks after Fort Knox, so we had to be sure that Fort Knox was safe, because it also is it's an icon for the United States, and it is important to protect. So during September 11th, as the planes first hit, we were in a staff meeting, and the government quickly began to move into its emergency operations. And the emergency operations mean that many of our leaders go into safe places, but we
Right.
in the operating agencies had to look after what we had. So we decided that it would be safest if we shut down a mint, the one in Philadelphia, which is the largest one, and which had um, uh, plans that were found among some of the intelligence community sources. And so we closed the Philadelphia Mint for a day and sent our people home because we did not want there to be an adverse accident or for it to be blown up. But then, as we began to, as the day progressed, as the hours began to go by, we found that we could reopen the Mint the next day, because it was important that we were a nation at work, that we were strong, we were clear, we were not going to be intimidated by others, and that we were going to keep our nation functioning. So the Mint came back up again, and we were in good shape. It wasn't long after that that we came across something else, Yashi, that was a real lesson for Paul O'Neill and myself, which was that Paul O'Neill was very strong on safety.
Right.
And he felt very strongly that your people within your factory need to be looked after. So one of the things he had done when he first came in as Secretary of the Treasury was ask Larry Summers what the safety record was for the Department
Mhm.
of Treasury. That was not what Larry Summers had expected, but he did it with all of us. So we ended up with more than 100 safety violations at
Wow.
the United States Mint after a safety review. So we were quickly trying to figure out what we could do because these are massive, big, old operations. And this is the Philadelphia Mint, the largest in the
Right.
country.
Yes.
And so we ended up closing the Mint for a period of time. Paul O'Neill said to me, 3 days, Henrietta. And I said, no, I think we're going to need longer than that. And I put to use something that we used in nonprofits, which is that we decided that our senior management, as well as those who were on the mint floor, the factory, manufacturing facility, would all work together in little tiger teams, and they would work to resolve the safety violations. The mint came up, and we had built an enormous cadre of strong, committed teams. And it was clear that there was a pride. People were now at the point where their spouses were sending me notes that they were now at home cleaning out their garages, washing their garage floors, painting them because they wanted them to be as clean as the mint now was, and we were having no safety violations. They patrolled their own homes. So it just made you realize that something you did for your nation, something you did for your country, you could take home and that you could overcome it. We then began winning awards for being so safe as a government agency. Anyway, it was an interesting lesson about risk, how you can overcome it, and how you can do it as a team.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like the perfect example of you taking lessons learned from a different experience and bringing them into this scenario and seeing real impact outside of your job,
Yeah.
right? So, how long did it end up taking if it wasn't 3 days?
so we ended up being down for about 5 weeks, and
Oh,
in the
wow.
Philadelphia Mint is half the currency. We'd never closed down before, so I was very worried as a mint director that, what if the nation's currency weren't operating? We needed it in our cash registers and we needed it for general commerce. But the Denver Mint, who is the other large circulating mint, said that we think we can do it. We think we can keep the nation's currency going. And we trusted our people, and they came through fabulous. I mean, they were just excellent. So we found that we could adapt and that we could help each other. I mean, it's a real teamwork when it's like a relay race when you pass the baton to the next team and they take over
Sounds like
and they
it. Yeah.
do stunningly. Anyway, they did a great job, and we learned a lesson.
Sounds like it. So, I think pivoting a little bit from your domestic experience, I'd love to learn more about what were some challenges that you faced when you were working in more international environments, whether you want to speak to your UN experience or working with US aid? Just, you know, pick your favorite and share a story on that with us.
Um, so there's so many stories, Yashi, and you learn so much, which is part of the beauty of the world.
Right.
But I think the challenges that you come across um, are often challenges of culture. And so for that, we had, let's say, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, when Ebola came, the people in the villages were really scared and they did not know what to do. They did not know how Ebola was passing from one person to another. And so we sent in help to try to tell people what was happening. But what we were also worried as a world community that the people we were sending in could get Ebola. And so often people arrived in these hazmat suits. They looked like they were from outer space.
Sounds like it. Yep.
And they would arrive in vehicles that were very big and bulky and armored. And as a result, the local culture thought that these Western medicine people were not there to help them, that they were afraid of it, and they did not know if they could trust the people. So you needed to have people in the villages, often women, who were well respected and who could speak about Ebola, and that you wanted to be sure, as someone, to wash your hands, to not be going through some of the burial rights that you had known, because now there was this very virulent strain of Ebola moving through the world. So you learn the challenge of culture. You also often learn about the challenge of using public and private partnerships. When I went to Mozambique, that we had just had a hurricane, and the hurricane meant that all of the tin roofs, corrugated tin roofs, had flown off of the buildings. So people and families were disrupted because they ran in the storm. Some people ran to the school, others, they ran in every direction, and families lost each other. But what they needed was just something very simple, and it's a roof nail that would allow the corrugated roof to be attached to the building. It's something that a private company would know. It's something that the people of Beira in Mozambique did not know, and no one had them. But it is a reminder that there are public private solutions that we can find all over the world. And when we are traveling, we should look for things that our companies could do that can help in an environment, because it's all around you, it's everywhere around you. Um, but Yashi, there are more stories if you'd like them.
I mean, I think this was great. And tying it into companies, you mentioned that you've sat on a number of boards. Have you taken these types of examples and used them in terms of the vision that you have or when you're advising as a board member? Or what type of role do you take on Henrietta typically? Are you focused more on the social and say governance aspect of it? Do you focus more on the financial impact? What does it look like to be a board member at these companies?
So I think it's important as a board member to cover all those bases. You cannot just be singular focused. The world should not be in vertical cones. You have to be multi-sectoral. You have to think like a network.
Mhm.
And now that we human beings are going to be talking and working more with machines, and their intelligence is also going to be in a network, it's very important to be multisectoral. So I try to work on all of them. So the environmental and sustainability, on the compensation committee, and all of, how you look after your people. You're always on audit because that's always where you start, in the finance committee. So, coming from small business, you have to do it all. You have to learn it all. And I think it's very important to actually do it all. But one of the things that I do now bring to boards is, after being in UNICEF, you realize that the world has to be made for the young. The young are our future. And Yashi, as you know, the young all over the world do not always have the same opportunities. And half of the
Absolutely.
world is not connected to the internet. And yet, what the young people in the world are asking for is a good education and some skills so that they can be an entrepreneur or make a livelihood. It is an enormous risk for the world if we do not educate them, if we do not connect every school to the internet. And yet, it is an enormous opportunity given the demographics, particularly of Africa and India. I mean, we need 10 million jobs a month created, and we're not doing that as a world. So they're going to have to be entrepreneurs, they're going to have these skills. And we started a big public private partnership in UNICEF called Generation Unlimited. And I think that's where you want the world to go, so that you will tell boards about things like Generation Unlimited. And they have got to try to help this generation of young people, because there are 1.3 billion young people between the ages of 10 and 24. They are the future workers, the future consumers, and they're the talent of the world. So we've we've got to get out there as companies and really focus on them. It's a big risk, big opportunity.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I think when we think about the lack of access to internet, which really helps the world stay connected, which helps bring some of these opportunities to the table, my first thought is how do we innovate more in that space, or what does innovation look like to increase, you know, access to this particular group of people, not obviously in the even I think domestically, like you would be surprised in the US and how many of these large urban centers there still is a lack of opportunity. And I know that a lot of corporations here in the US do try to have some form of program or recruiting event to help, I think, decrease that number, but it still is a day-to-day struggle. So when you think about innovation in this space, what are some of your thoughts around that?
Well, Yashi, you are absolutely right that it's in the United States also. So innovations are extremely important. We just can't keep doing things the same way. So going to your point about education, if we can connect every school in the world to the internet, it means that this generation will have a level playing field for everyone in the world. And it won't be that one part of the world is just rocketing away from another because they have access to a world that the other group does not. So low Earth satellites, something the United States is very good at, could connect to little Wi-Fi antennas on the top of every schoolhouse everywhere in the world. And you can do that in the United States. You need that out in the rural communities. You need it in Canada. You need it all around the world. You need it throughout Africa. And a lot of countries don't know where all of their local schools are. But in the villages, people know where their school is. And at night, if you had connectivity, it would mean that families would gather in the schools, they would understand the importance of education, and they could use their phones, they could learn subjects, but it would change the world. So I think it's doable next 2 or 3 years. I think it is a big idea that we could all get behind, and it would be great for the United States to lead it internationally. But there's one. A second one is I've joined a group in Geneva, the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Accelerator, and it has just launched a quantum institute that CERN will be leading. And quantum computing is now coming fast. Artificial intelligence is all around us, Yashi, but quantum
Absolutely.
computing
Yep.
is still out there. So it's a good time for the diplomats and others to think about how are we going to use it for good in the world. And our next areas are going to be training and neuroscience. I have done quite a bit of work in the healthcare field, and you can see that this is going to be a decade in which biology and engineering are going to be connected in a way that we just have never seen. So that um, brain implants and implants on your body will allow people who are in wheelchairs to walk again. It will allow people who have not spoken to be able to speak again. It's going to be the next decade or two, the decade of the brain, about how to maybe get a vaccine for Alzheimer's, how to solve many of the neuroscience issues. It's going to be enormously exciting, but it is innovations that will carry us. And so the risks for corporations and for individuals, we will have to carry along with all of the opportunities. It's going
Hmm.
to be exciting, but the innovations are going to be our lifeblood. And because they carry both risk and promise, it means that we have to be very smart about it. We have to teach that so that we, in our schools, we learn how to take risks, how to be innovative, how to solve problems, how to solve your own problems and become
Right.
a good entrepreneur. It's going to be very, very important, Yashi.
I would have said, Henrietta, that you sound extremely ambitious, but after hearing about all of your experiences and how they're related and how you've taken lessons learned to continue building in other places, I am 100% behind some of the ideas that you've brought to the table here today. And it's fascinating to think about, really. I mean, growing up the last 2 decades, you would have never thought that something like that would be possible, but it is coming. So, to close us out, I'd love to know what your plans are for the holidays and if you're going anywhere fun or how are you spending them?
So I am in California right now on a lemon and avocado ranch. So I am number one going to be sure that all of our trees in the orchard are happy and they have enough water, which in the wintertime in California, that usually we get enough rainfall and we don't get too much. But I will be with my family and we have our Christmas trees up. We are ready for the holidays, and but we're going to stay home. And you, Yashi, what are you going to do?
I'm actually going to be spending some time in Puerto Rico at the end of this month, which I'm really excited about. And then once I'm back, just building and planning the rest of this podcast for next year. We've got a lot of topics to cover, a lot of risks to talk about, and I'm very excited. So thank you so much, Henrietta, for joining us today on another episode of Masters of Risk. This was an incredibly eye-opening conversation, and I hope to continue chatting with you in the future and seeing, some of these real life topics come to fruition.
Good. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Yashi.
Thanks so much. Have a great holiday season. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.